The Colour of Magic by Terry Pratchett. The podcast versions of the original Facebook live readings by Matthew Ogden, the Bearded Wit. Please bear in mind, as usual, that these are live recordings, so there are the odd fluff here and there, the odd stumble, and quite often laughter, as the reader appreciates the humour along with you, the listener. Don't forget to like, share, and make sure that absolutely everybody you know that might like this is aware of these recordings. Thanks very much. Before we start, I would ask you to go over to patreon.com/thebeardedwit and become a patron of the podcast. This podcast is only possible because of the generosity of my patrons. You can become a patron from as little as $5 a month, which is the price of a good cup of coffee, or even a bad cup of coffee in some places. But that does mean that I'm able to keep recording this material and get it out there for you as soon as possible after broadcast on Facebook. So the link is patreon.com/thebeardedwit. $5 a month makes all the difference in the world to me. I'd like to thank all of the patrons that have supported me so far, and I hope the new patrons will enjoy what I do as much as everyone else does. Thanks very much. Now then, sit back, put your feet up, and enjoy the reading. Part 6. Just before we start, before we go anywhere, I did want to say a very big thank you to everybody for the very kind messages that were being sent to me in lots of different channels, in lots of different ways, lots of different places, to say, sort of pass on your best wishes about my parents, particularly my dad, who was poorly for a while, causing me to bat off back to the United Kingdom for a protracted period of time. I'm delighted to be able to say that my dad is improving massively. A second operation that he was scheduled to have potentially next week may now not happen. It's been postponed for at least another 2 weeks because he's healing really well. So fingers crossed on that front that it's not needed at all. And my mum is also, well, both my mum and my dad are recovered from COVID, although they've got this kind of residual things. I think dad has still got a bit breathless and mum's got a bit of a cough every now and then, and it's that kind of stuff. But at 85 and 82 they're still going strong, and I'm very lucky to have them both still. So that's one of the reasons why I batted away is my mum and dad, and I love them. So quick recap before we start. Oh, no, actually, got to do the usual thing, and that is to do the plug for Patreon. If you are... Oh, I've got something interesting crawling across my desk. Bugger off. I don't know what you are or where you came from, but you can go back to wherever it is. And here, live on Natural History with Matsky. Yes, so... Bugger off from my tea. Thank you. Little bugger. Sorry. Yes, so if you can go to patreon.com/thebeardedwit and become a patron to support me producing this kind of stuff, that would be fabulous. I would be very, very grateful indeed. It's from $5, €5, basically £5 these days a month. You can get access to a lot of back story, some behind the scenes stuff, all of the stuff that I'm producing without ads, that kind of malarkey. So please do join in. That would be great. You also get a say on what it is that I'm producing. I would like also to do a quick plug. I'm going to be doing a lot of this stuff soon. Yeah, that's it. And also this sort of stuff as well. So yes, that's the stuff that's going forward for the Rats in the Walls podcast that's coming up. And I'm trying to work out whether I should do those as live readings or just do them straight as podcasts. I don't know. Put in a comment what you think, if you'd rather me doing them as a live reading like this, only with the creepy, scary, spooky stuff, or whatever. Anyway, okay. Enough of that. Let us crack on. Recap. We have got to the point in the story that we've realised that basically Two Flower... I was actually listening to this back... Sorry, I keep getting sidetracked. I was listening back to episode 5 and I realised at the beginning of that I called him Two Fish. Great one, Matt. Good job. Two Flower, Rincewind, are basically being toyed with by the gods. They have been put through close to hell and have... He's coming back. I've got a little creepy, crawly bugger. Okay, you're going to go off my desk. I don't want to kill you, but I don't want you on my desk. Bye. He's gone now. Yes, sorry. So, yes, where were we? Yes, Bel-Shamharoth. They have defeated this hideous god, but it's a glorified sort of board game that's being played by the gods, as we have discovered. And every so often when things happen, they hear this sort of strange rattling noise, which sounds an awful lot like a bunch of dice in a cup. We closed the last one with the words from, or the thoughts from Rincewind saying, "And I have survived Bel-Shamharoth." Fantastic. Let's go on from there. Two Flower was helping the hero, this is Hrun, sort through the treasure stolen from the temple. It was mostly silver, set with unpleasant purple stones, representations of spiders, octopi, and the tree-dwelling Octasia of the Hubland wastes, and they figured largely in the heap. Rincewind tried to shut his ears to the grating voice beside him, but it was no use. The grating voice is Kring the Sword. "And then I belonged to the Pasha of Redurat and played a prominent part in the Battle of Great Neth, which is where I received the slight nick you may have noticed some 2/3 of the way up my blade," Kring was saying from its temporary home in a tussock. "Some infidel was wearing an octiron collar, most unsporting, and of course I was a lot sharper in those days, and my master used me to cut silk handkerchiefs in mid-air and... am I boring you?" "Oh, no, not at all. It's all very interesting," said Rincewind, with his eyes still on Hrun. How trustworthy would he be? Here they were, out in the wilds, and there were trolls about. "I can see you were a cultured person," Kring went on. "So seldom do I get to meet really interesting people for any length of time, anyway. What I'd really like is a nice mantelpiece to hang over, somewhere nice and quiet. I spent a couple of 100 years on the bottom of a lake once." "Oh, that must have been fun," said Rincewind absently. "Not really," said Kring. "Oh, no, I suppose not. What I'd really like to be is a ploughshare. I don't know what that is, but it sounds like an existence with some point to it." Two Flower hurried over to the wizard. "I had a great idea," he burbled. "Yeah," said Rincewind wearily. "Why don't we get Hrun to accompany us to Quirm?" Two Flower looked amazed. "How did you know?" he said. "I just thought you'd think it," said Rincewind. Hrun ceased stuffing silverware into his saddlebags and grinned encouragingly at them. Then his eyes strayed back to the luggage. "If we had him with us, who'd attack us?" said Two Flower. Rincewind scratched his chin. "Hrun," he suggested. "But we saved his life in the temple." "Well, if by attack you mean kill," said Rincewind, "I don't think he'd do that. He's not that sort. He'd just rob us and tie us up and leave us for the wolves, I expect." "Oh, come on." "Look, this is real life," snapped Rincewind. I mean, here you are, carrying around a box full of gold. Don't you think anyone in their right minds would jump at the chance of pinching it? I would, he added mentally, if I hadn't seen what the luggage does to prying fingers. Then the answer hit him. He looked from Hrun to the picture box. The picture imp was doing its laundry in a tiny tub, while the salamanders dozed in their cage. I've got an idea, he said. I mean, what is it he really wants? That heroes really want? Gold? Said Two-Flower. No, I mean really want. Two-Flower frowned. I don't quite understand, he said. Rincewind picked up the picture box. Hrun, he said, come over here, will you? The days passed peacefully. True, a small band of bridge trolls tried to ambush them on one occasion, and a party of brigands nearly caught them unawares one night, but unwisely tried to investigate the luggage before slaughtering the sleepers. Hrun demanded, and got, double pay for both occasions. If any harm comes to us, said Rincewind, then there will be no one to operate the magic box. No more pictures of Hrun. Understand? Hrun nodded, his eyes fixed on the latest picture. It showed Hrun striking a heroic pose, with one foot on a heap of slain trolls. Me and you and little friend Two-Flowers, we all get on okay, he said. Also tomorrow we may get a better profile, okay? He carefully wrapped the picture in trollskin and stowed it in his saddlebag, along with all the others. It seems to be working, said Two-Flower admiringly, as Hrun rode ahead to scout the road. Sure, said Rincewind, what heroes like best is themselves. You're getting quite good at using the picture box, you know that? Yeah. So you might like to have this. Two-Flower held out a picture. What is it? asked Rincewind. Oh, just the picture you took in the temple. Rincewind looked in horror. There, bordered by a few glimpses of tentacle, was a huge, walled, calloused, potion-stained and unfocused thumb. That is the story of my life, he said wearily. You win, said Fate, pushing the heap of souls across the gaming table. The assembled gods relaxed. There will be other games, he added. The lady smiled into two eyes that were like holes in the universe. And then there was nothing but the ruin of the forests and a cloud of dust on the horizon, which drifted away on the breeze. And sitting on a pitted and moss-grown milestone, a black, raggedy figure. His was the air of one who is unjustly put upon, who is dreaded and feared, yet who is the only friend of the poor, and the best doctor for the mortally wounded. Death, although of course completely eyeless, watched Rincewind disappearing with what he would, had his face possessed any mobility at all, have been a frown. Death, although exceptionally busy at times, had decided that he now had a hobby. There was something about the wizard that irked him beyond measure. He didn't keep appointments, for one thing. "I'll get you yet, Cully," said Death, in the voice like the slamming of leaden coffins. "You see if I don't." The Lure of the Worm. It was called the Wormberg, and it rose almost 1/2 of a mile above the Green Valley, a mountain, huge, grey, and upside down. At its base it was a mere score of yards across. Then it rose through clinging cloud, curving gracefully outward like an upturned trumpet, until it was truncated by a plateau fully 1/4 of a mile across. There was a tiny forest up there, its greenery cascading over the lip. There were buildings. There was even a small river, tumbling over the edge in a waterfall so wind-whipped that it reached the ground as rain. There were also a number of cave mouths, a few yards below the plateau. They had a crudely carved, regular look about them, so that on this crisp autumn morning the Wormberg hung over the clouds like a giant's dovecote. This would mean that the doves had a wingspan slightly in excess of 40 yards. "I knew it," said Rincewind. "We're in a strong magical field." Twoflower and Hrun looked around the little hollow where they'd made their noonday halt, and then they looked at each other. The horses were quietly cropping the rich grass by the stream. Yellow butterflies skittered among the bushes. There was a smell of thyme and a buzzing of bees. The wild pig on the spit sizzled gently. Hrun shrugged and went back to oiling his biceps. They gleamed. "Looks all right to me," he said. "Try tossing a coin," said Rincewind. "What?" "Go on, toss a coin." "Okay," said Hrun, "if it gives you any pleasure." He reached into his pouch and withdrew a handful of loose change, plundered from a dozen realms. With some care he selected a slotty, leaden quarter iotum and balanced it on a purple thumbnail. "You call," he said. "Heads or—" He inspected the reverse with an air of intense concentration. "Some sort of fish with legs." "When it's in the air," said Rincewind. Hrun grinned and flicked his thumb. The iotum rose, spinning. "Edge," said Rincewind, without even looking at it. Magic never dies, it merely fades away. Nowhere was this more evident on the whole blue expanse of the Discworld than in those areas that had been the scene of the great battles of the Mage Wars, which had happened very shortly after creation. In those days, magic in its raw state had been widely available, and had been eagerly utilised by the first men in their war against the gods. The precise origins of the Mage Wars have been lost in the fogs of time. But disc philosophers agree that the first men, shortly after their creation, understandably lost their temper. And great and pyrotechnic were the battles that followed. The sun wheeled across the sky, the seas boiled, weird storms ravaged the land, small white pigeons mysteriously appeared in people's clothing, and the very stability of the disc, carried as it was through space on the backs of 4 giant turtle-riding elephants, was threatened. This resulted in stern action by the old High Ones, to whom even the gods themselves are answerable. The gods were banished to high places. Men were recreated to a good deal smaller, and much of the old wild magic was sucked out of the earth. That did not solve the problem of those places on the disk which, during the wars, had suffered a direct hit by a spell. The magic faded away, slowly, over the millennia, releasing as it decayed myriads of subastral particles that severely distorted the reality around it. Quick slurp of tea. Excuse me. Oh, God, I love tea. Rincewind, Two Flower, and Hrun stared at the coin. "It is," said Hrun. "Well, you're a wizard, so what?" "I don't do that sort of spell." "You mean you can't?" Rincewind ignored this because it was true. "Try it again," he suggested. Hrun pulled out a fistful of coins. The first two landed in the usual manner. So did the fourth. The third landed on its edge and balanced there. The fifth turned into a small yellow caterpillar and crawled away. The sixth, upon reaching its zenith, vanished with a sharp spang, and a moment later there was a small thunderclap. "Hey, that one was silver!" exclaimed Hrun, rising to his feet and staring up. "Bring it back!" "I don't know where it's gone," said Rincewind wearily. "It's probably still accelerating. The ones I tried this morning didn't come down anyway." Hrun was still staring into the sky. "What?" said Two Flower. Rincewind sighed. He had been dreading this. "We've strayed into a zone with a high magical index," he said. "Don't ask me how. Once upon a time, a really powerful magical field must have been generated here, and we're feeling the after effects." "Precisely," said a passing bush. Hrun's head jerked down. You mean this is one of those places?" he asked. "Let's get out of here." "Right," agreed Rincewind. "If we retrace our steps, we might make it. We can stop every mile or so and toss a coin." He stood up urgently and started stuffing things into his saddlebags. "What?" said Two Flower. Rincewind stopped. "Look," he snapped. "Just don't argue. Come on." It looks all right," said Two Flower. "Just a bit underpopulated, that's all." "Yes," said Rincewind. "Odd, isn't it? Come on." There was a nose. Good God. There was a noise high above them. Maybe a nose as well, I have no idea. There was a nose. I'm losing it. There was a noise high above them, like a strip of leather being slapped on a wet rock. Something glassy and indistinct passed over Rincewind's head, throwing up a cloud of ashes from the fire, and the pig carcass took off from the spit and rocketed into the sky. It banked to avoid a clump of trees, righted itself, roared around in a tight circle, and headed hubwards, leaving a trail of hot pork fat droplets. "What are they doing now?" asked the old man. The young woman glanced at the scrying glass. "Heading rimwards at speed," she reported. "By the way, they've still got that box on legs." The old man chuckled, an oddly disturbing sound in the dark and dusty crypt. "Sapient pearwood," he said. "Remarkable. Yes, I think we will have that. Please See to it, my dear, before they go beyond your power, perhaps. Silence. Or what, Liesa? Said the old man. In this dim light there was something odd about the way he was slumped in the stone chair. You killed me once already, remember? She snorted and stood up, tossing back her hair scornfully. It was red, flecked with gold. Erect, Liesa Wormbidder was entirely a magnificent sight. She was also almost naked, except for a couple of mere scraps of the lightest chainmail and riding boots of iridescent dragon hide. In one boot was thrust a riding crop, unusual in that it was as long as a spear and tipped with tiny steel barbs. My power will be quite sufficient, she said coldly. The indistinct figure appeared to nod, or at least wobble. As you keep assuring me, he said. Liesa snorted and strode out of the hall. Her father did not bother to watch her go. One reason for this, of course, was that since he had been dead for 3 months, his eyes were, in any case, not in the best of condition. The other was that as a wizard, even a dead wizard of the 15th grade, his optic nerves had long since become attuned to seeing into levels and dimensions far removed from common reality, and were therefore somewhat inefficient at observing the merely mundane. During his life, they had appeared to others to be 8-faceted and eerily insectile. Besides, since he was now suspended in the narrow space between the living world and the dark shadow world of death, he could survey the whole of causality itself. That was why, apart from a mild hope that this time his wretched daughter would get herself killed, he did not devote his considerable powers to learning more about the 3 travellers galloping desperately out of his realm. Several hundred yards away, Liesa was in a strange humour as she strode down the worm steps that led into the hollow heart of the Wormberg, followed by 6 riders. Would this be the opportunity? Perhaps here was the key to break the deadlock, the key to the throne of the Wormberg. It was rightfully hers, of course, but tradition said that only a man could rule the Wormberg. That irked Liesa, and when she was angry the power flowed stronger, and the dragons were especially big and especially ugly. If she had a man, things would be different. Someone who, for preference, was a big strapping lad but short on brains. Someone who would do what he was told. The biggest of the 3 now fleeing the Dragonlands might do. And if it turned out that he wouldn't, then dragons were always hungry. Oops. What have I done here? Sorry about that. Yes. The biggest of the 3 now fleeing the Dragonlands might do, and if it turned out that he wouldn't, then dragons were always hungry and needed to be fed regularly. She could see to it that they got ugly. Uglier than usual, anyway. The stairway passed through a stone arch and ended in a narrow ledge near the roof of the great cavern where the worms roosted. Sunbeams from the myriad entrances around the walls crisscrossed the dusty gloom like amber rods in which 1,000,000 golden insects had been preserved. Below, they revealed nothing but a thin haze. Above, The walking rings started so close to Liessa's head that she could reach up and touch one. They stretched away in their thousands across the upturned acres of the cavern roof. It had taken a score of masons a score of years to hammer in the pitons for all those, hanging from their work as they progressed. Yet they were as nothing compared to the 88 major rings that clustered near the apex of the dome. A further 50 had been lost in the old days as they were swung into place by teams of sweating slaves, and there had been slaves aplenty in the first days of the power. And the great rings had gone crashing into the depths, dragging their unfortunate manipulators with them. But 88 had been installed, huge as rainbows, rusty as blood. From them, the dragons sense Liessa's presence. Air swishes around the cavern as 88 pairs of wings unfold like a complicated puzzle. Great heads with green multifaceted eyes peer down at her. The beasts are still faintly transparent. While the men around her take their hook boots from the rack, Liessa bends her mind to the task of full visualization. Above her, in the musty air, the dragons become fully visible. Bronze scales dully reflecting the sunbeam shafts. Her mind throbs. But now that the power is flowing fully, she can, with barely a waver of concentration, think of other things. Now she too buckles on the hook boots and turns a graceful cartwheel to bring their hooks with a faint clang against a couple of the walking rings in the ceiling. Only now it's the floor. The world has changed. Now she is standing on the edge of a deep bowl or crater, floored with the little rings across which the dragon riders are already strolling with a pendulum gait. In the centre of the bowl, their huge mounts wait among the herd. Far above are the distant rocks of the cavern floor, discoloured by centuries of dragon droppings. Moving with the easy gliding movement that is second nature, Liessa sets off towards her own dragon, Leolith, who turns his great horsey head towards her. His jowls are greasy with pork fat. "It was very enjoyable," he says in her mind. "I thought I said there were to be no unaccompanied flights," she snaps in thought. "I was hungry, Liessa." "Curb your hunger. Soon there will be horses to eat." "The reins stick in our teeth. Are there any warriors? We like warriors." Liessa swings down the mounting ladder and lands with her legs locked around Leolith's leathery neck. "The warrior is mine. There are a couple of others you can have. One appears to be a wizard of sorts," she adds by way of encouragement. "Oh, you know how it is with wizards. Half an hour afterwards you could do with another one," the dragon grumbles. He spreads his wings and drops. "They're gaining!" screamed Rincewind. He bent even lower over his horse's neck and groaned. Two-Flower was trying to keep up while at the same time craning around to look at the flying beasts. "You don't understand," said the tourist, screaming above the terrible noise of the wing beats. "All my life I've wanted to see dragons." "From the inside," shouted Rincewind. "Shut up and ride." He whipped at his horse with the reins and stared at the wood overhead. the wood ahead, trying to drag it closer to them by sheer willpower. Under those trees, they'd be safe. Under those trees, no dragons could fly. He heard the clap of wings before shadows folded around him. Instinctively, he rolled in the saddle and felt the white-hot stab of pain as something sharp scored a line across his shoulders. Behind him, Hrun screamed, but it sounded more like a bellow of rage than a cry of pain. The barbarian had vaulted down into the leather and drawn the black sword, Kring. He flourished it as one of the dragons curved in for another low pass. "No bloody lizard does that to me!" he roared. Rincewind leaned over and grabbed Two Flower's reins. "Come on!" he hissed. "But the dragons!" said Two Flower, entranced. "Blast the—" began the wizard and froze. Another dragon had peeled off from the encircling dots overhead and was gliding towards them. Rincewind let go of Two Flower's horse, swore bitterly, and spurred his own mount toward the trees, alone. He didn't look back at the sudden commotion behind him when a shadow passed over him, merely gibbered weakly and tried to burrow into the horse's mane. Then, instead of the searing, piercing pain he had expected, there was a series of stinging blows as the terrified animal passed under the eaves of the wood. The wizard tried to hang on, but another low branch, stouter than the others, knocked him out of the saddle. The last thing he heard before the flashing blue lights of unconsciousness closed in was a high reptilian scream of frustration and the thrashing of talons in the treetops. When he awoke again, a dragon was watching him. At least, it was staring in his general direction. Rincewind groaned and tried to dig his way out or into the moss with his shoulder blades, then gasped as the pain hit him. Through the mists of agony and fear, he looked back at the dragon. The creature was hanging from a branch of a large dead oak tree, several 100 feet away. Its bronze-gold wings were tightly wrapped around its body, but the long equine head turned this way and that at the end of a remarkably prehensile neck. It was scanning the forest. It was also semi-transparent. Although the sun glinted off its scales, Rincewind could clearly make out the outlines of the branches behind it. On one of them, a man was sitting, dwarfed by the hanging reptile. He appeared to be naked except for a pair of very high boots, a tiny leather holdall in the region of his groin, and a high-crested helmet. He was swinging a short sword back and forth idly, and stared out across the treetops with the air of one carrying out a tedious and unglamorous assignment. A beetle began to crawl laboriously up Rincewind's leg. The wizard wondered how much damage a half-solid dragon could do. Would it only half kill him? He decided not to stay and find out. Moving on heels, fingertips, and shoulder muscles, Rincewind wriggled sideways until foliage masked the oak and its occupants. Then he scrambled to his feet and haired off between the trees. He had no destination in mind, no provisions, and no horse. But while he still had legs, he could run. Ferns and brambles whipped at him, but he didn't feel them at all. When he had put about a mile between him and the dragon, he stopped and collapsed against a tree, which then spoke to him. "Psst," it said. Dreading what he might see, Rincewind let his gaze slide upwards. It tried to fasten on innocuous bits of bark and leaf, but the scourge of curiosity forced it to leave them behind. Finally, it fixed on a black sword thrust straight through the branch above Rincewind's head. "Don't just stand there," said the sword, in a voice that sounded a voice like the sound of a finger dragged around the rim of a large empty wine glass. "Pull me out." "What?" said Rincewind, his chest still heaving. "Pull me out," repeated Kring. "It's either that or I'll be spending the next 1,000,000 years in a coal measure. Did I ever tell you about the time I was thrown into a lake up in the... What happened to the others?" said Rincewind, still clutching the tree desperately. "Oh, the dragons got them. And the horses. And that box thing. Me too, except that Hrun dropped me. What a stroke of luck for you." "Well," began Rincewind. Kring ignored him. "I expect you'll be in a hurry to rescue them," it added. "Yes, well... So, if you'll just pull me out, we can be off." Rincewind squinted up at the sword. A rescue attempt had hitherto been so far at the back of his mind that if some advanced speculations on the nature and shape of the many-dimensional multiplexy of the universe were correct, it was right at the front. But a magic sword was a valuable item. And it would be a long trek back home, wherever that was. He scrambled up the tree and inched along the branch. Kring was buried very firmly in the wood. He gripped the pommel and heaved until lights flashed in front of his eyes. "Try again," said the sword encouragingly. Rincewind groaned and gritted his teeth. "Could be worse," said Kring. "This could have been an anvil." "Yargh!" hissed the wizard, fearing for the future of his groin. "I have had a multi-dimensional existence," said the sword. "Huh?" I have had many names, you know." "Amazing," said Rincewind. He swayed backwards as the blade slid free. It felt strangely light. Back on the ground again, he decided to break the news. "I really don't think rescue is a good idea," he said. "I think we'd better head back to a city, to raise a search party." "The dragons headed hubwards," said Kring. "However, I suggest we start with the one in the trees over there." "Sorry, but you can't leave them to their fate." Rincewind looked surprised. I can't," he said. "No, you can't. Look, I'll be frank, I've worked with better material than you, but it's either that or... Have you ever spent 1,000,000 years in a coal measure? Look, So if you don't stop arguing, I'll chop your head off." Rincewind saw his own arm snap up until the shimmering blade was humming a mere inch from his throat. He tried to force his fingers to let go. They wouldn't. I don't know how to be a hero," he shouted. Kring replied, "I propose to teach you." "Right. Ha ha ha!" That's where we're going to leave it. It is 8:45, and I don't want it to be as long as the last read, which was almost an hour and a half. So we'll call it a day there, with the promise that we shall return same time, same place next week to continue and see what Rincewind gets up to and see how Kring the sword gets on with turning him into a hero. I can't imagine it's going to be very successful, but hey, who knows? Thank you very much for being here. As usual, everybody, you're all very, very lovely. And thank you again for all your kind messages and your words of support during my parents' recent illness. I'm very, very grateful for that. And I can say on their behalf that they are too. So, you're all wonderful human beings. Take care of yourselves this week. Do go over to patreon.com/thebeardedwit and sign up to be a patron if you're not already. If you are and you're listening, thank you so much for your support. I can't tell you how much it means to me to have your support. Look after yourselves and see you same time, same place next week for more of The Colour of Magic. It's good to be back.